The officer smiled the second he saw the black driver, convinced he already knew the whole story. 15 minutes later, a secure call from the Pentagon would force his captain to race toward the highway. The morning sky over Colorado Springs, Colorado, was washed in soft summer sunlight as commuters filled an eastbound highway carrying traffic toward Peterson Space Force Base. The stop occurred several miles west of Peterson Space Force Base, within the jurisdiction of the Colorado Springs Police Department. Traffic moved steadily, mixing government sedans, delivery vans, pickup trucks, and families beginning another ordinary weekday. Officer Jordan Johnson adjusted the collar of his patrol uniform before resting one hand on the steering wheel. At 36 years old, Jordan was tall and muscular, carrying himself with the confidence that came from nearly a decade in law enforcement. He believed experience had sharpened his instincts beyond what any academy textbook could teach. His supervisors often praised his productivity, and he quietly took pride in believing he could recognize suspicious behavior within seconds. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, confidence had slowly become certainty, and certainty had become assumption. As another line of vehicles rolled past, one aging black sport utility vehicle caught his attention. The paint was clean but beginning to fade from years beneath the intense Colorado sun. A slightly worn license plate frame touched the lower edge of the registration sticker, although the plate number and expiration date remained clearly readable. Jordan had allowed two white drivers with nearly identical plate frames to pass only minutes earlier, yet the moment he noticed the older black man behind this wheel, he decided the minor detail required immediate investigation. Behind the wheel sat 62-year-old Vincent Holmes, a distinguished black man with neatly trimmed gray-speckled buzzcut hair, calm posture, and both hands resting naturally on the steering wheel. He wore a navy polo shirt, khaki slacks, and a simple wristwatch. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing remarkable. Yet Jordan quietly convinced himself the vehicle somehow did not fit the man driving it. Without realizing it, he had already built an entire story inside his own mind before activating his emergency lights. The driver calmly pulled onto the shoulder without hesitation. Jordan stepped from his patrol vehicle, straightened his duty belt, and approached with practiced confidence. The driver's window lowered before Jordan reached it. "Good morning, officer," the man said with a polite smile. His voice carried the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to remaining composed under pressure. "License and registration," Jordan replied without returning the greeting. The driver nodded immediately, carefully retrieving his wallet and registration folder without sudden movement. "Is there a reason I was stopped?" he asked respectfully. Jordan explained that he wanted to verify whether the license plate frame partially obstructed the registration sticker, even though the number and expiration date remained fully visible from his position. The older man simply acknowledged the statement and handed over every requested document. His driver's license identified him as Vincent Holmes. The address matched the registration perfectly. Insurance was current. The vehicle belonged to him. Everything appeared completely ordinary. Jordan studied Vincent's face, expecting nervousness, frustration, or irritation. Instead, Vincent remained patient, quietly waiting without challenging the officer's authority. Somehow, that composure unsettled Jordan more than anger would have. People who had nothing to hide, he thought, usually asked more questions. His assumptions kept feeding themselves, each one reinforcing the last. A second patrol vehicle arrived moments later, driven by Officer Aaron Pierce, a younger officer still completing his first full year with the department. Aaron parked several yards behind Jordan's cruiser and watched from a respectful distance. He noticed immediately that the traffic stop appeared unusually calm. There was no argument, no raised voices, and no obvious violation beyond routine questioning. Jordan returned to Vincent's window and glanced through the interior once more. The cabin was exceptionally organized. A folded jacket rested across the rear seat beside a polished leather briefcase secured with combination locks. The briefcase immediately drew Jordan's attention. Vincent noticed his eyes settle on it, but said nothing. He simply waited. Jordan felt the familiar certainty returning, convincing himself that something important remained hidden beneath the quiet surface of this routine stop. Looking directly at Vincent, he made a decision that would change the course of everyone's morning. "Sir," Jordan said evenly, "I am going to need you to step out of the vehicle so I can ask you a few more questions." Vincent remained still for a moment. Am I being detained beyond the traffic inquiry, officer? For now, yes, Jordan replied. Then please explain what additional offense you are investigating. Jordan did not identify one. I am still determining whether another issue exists. Vincent slowly opened the driver's door after receiving Jordan's instruction, stepped onto the shoulder, and closed it carefully behind him without making any sudden movement. The steady stream of morning traffic continued only a few yards away, yet the atmosphere surrounding the two men felt strangely isolated. Vincent kept his hands visible and maintained relaxed eye contact. Where would you like me to stand, officer? He asked in the same calm tone he had used since the stop began. Jordan pointed toward the front of the sport utility vehicle. Right there. Vincent nodded and walked exactly where he had been instructed. Aaron remained several yards behind them, observing quietly. During his academy training, instructors had emphasized that a routine traffic stop should remain focused on objective facts, not personal impressions. So far, he had not seen anything that justified expanding the encounter. Jordan circled the vehicle once more, studying every detail as though expecting hidden evidence to reveal itself. He looked back at Vincent. Where are you headed this morning? Vincent answered without hesitation. To work. Jordan frowned slightly. Where do you work? Vincent smiled politely. In government service. The answer was truthful, yet intentionally simple. Jordan interpreted the lack of detail as evasiveness rather than privacy. Government service covers a lot of jobs, he replied. Can you be more specific? Vincent paused briefly before speaking. I have a meeting that I should not be late for. Jordan folded his arms. That is not what I asked. Vincent remained composed. I understand, officer. I simply prefer not to discuss my employment unless it is relevant to the traffic stop. Aaron quietly glanced toward Jordan, sensing the conversation drifting further away from the original reason for the stop. There had been no indication of impaired driving, no stolen vehicle alert, no expired registration, and no outstanding warrant returned from the preliminary records check. Everything appearing on Jordan's computer was completely clean. Even so, Jordan seemed increasingly convinced that he had simply not uncovered the real problem yet. A light breeze moved through the trees lining the highway as another patrol unit passed without slowing. Aaron briefly considered stepping forward to ask whether any assistance was needed, but he decided to continue observing. Interrupting a senior officer without clear justification could easily create unnecessary tension. Jordan walked back toward Vincent. How long have you owned this vehicle? Vincent answered immediately. Almost 9 years. Did you purchase it yourself? Yes. Paid in full. Vincent looked at Jordan for a moment before replying. Yes. Jordan continued asking questions that had little connection to any traffic violation. Do you live alone? Are you meeting someone? Does anyone else drive this vehicle? Vincent answered each question politely while never allowing frustration to show on his face. His steady composure slowly began attracting attention from passing motorists. One driver reduced speed noticeably before continuing down the highway. Another briefly glanced toward the patrol cars before merging into the next lane. The encounter remained peaceful, yet its unusual length made it increasingly noticeable. Then Jordan's eyes settled once again on the locked leather briefcase resting on the rear seat. His expression changed almost instantly. He stepped closer to the vehicle and pointed through the window. What is inside that case? Vincent turned toward the vehicle and answered honestly. Documents related to my work. Jordan looked directly at him. Open it. Vincent did not refuse. He simply responded with the same calm professionalism that had defined every moment of the encounter. The case contains controlled administrative materials related to my work. They are not hazardous or illegal, but they should not be exposed publicly or reviewed by anyone who lacks authorization. I would appreciate contacting the appropriate office before opening it outside my workplace. Jordan focused only on Vincent's warning that the materials should not be reviewed by anyone lacking authorization. In his mind, that single sentence confirmed every assumption he had already made. Aaron felt a knot forming in his stomach. He knew restricted government documents existed in many civilian and military positions, and requesting guidance before exposing them was not unusual. Before Aaron could process another thought, Jordan reached for his radio, requested additional supervisory guidance, then looked back at Vincent with renewed confidence. Vincent remained perfectly still, saying nothing further, while Jordan realized his next decision would either end the stop immediately or send it in a direction that none of them could yet imagine. Vincent remained standing beside the front fender exactly where Jordan had instructed him to wait. His posture was relaxed, his hands rested naturally at his sides, and his attention stayed on the officer without the slightest sign of irritation. Aaron noticed something that continued bothering him. People who felt unfairly accused usually protested or demanded explanations. Vincent didn't either. Instead, he watched every step with the calm patience of someone accustomed to working inside structured systems where discipline mattered more than emotion. Jordan lowered his radio after requesting supervisory guidance and turned back toward the sport utility vehicle. "I am going to ask you again," he said. "Open the briefcase." Vincent answered in the same measured tone. "Officer, I am not refusing to cooperate. I am asking for the opportunity to contact the office responsible for those materials before exposing work documents on the side of a public highway." Jordan interpreted the answer as another attempt to delay. "You keep talking about your office," he replied. "What office exactly?" Vincent looked toward the morning traffic for a brief second before returning his attention to Jordan. "I believe that information is unrelated to the reason for this stop." Aaron quietly shifted his weight. The original reason for stopping the vehicle had already faded into the background. The conversation now revolved almost entirely around Vincent's occupation. At that moment, a delivery truck rolled past, followed by several commuters whose eyes drifted toward the patrol cars. One driver slowed enough for a passenger to raise a phone toward the shoulder. There was nothing dramatic happening, yet a routine traffic stop lasting this long naturally attracted curiosity. Aaron felt an uneasy feeling settle in his chest. Halfway through the encounter, he realized something else. Jordan had never explained why additional questioning remained necessary after confirming the driver's license, registration, insurance, and vehicle ownership. That missing explanation lingered in Aaron's mind as he watched the conversation continue. Jordan stopped beside the rear passenger door and looked through the closed window toward the locked leather briefcase without touching either the vehicle or the case. It appeared well maintained, carrying only a small embossed government property label near one corner. There were no warning stickers, no military markings visible from where he stood, and nothing suggesting criminal activity. Still, the combination lock and Vincent's careful wording strengthened Jordan's growing suspicion that the case contained something far more significant than ordinary paperwork. "Is there anything illegal inside?" Jordan asked. Vincent answered immediately. "No." "Anything dangerous?" "No." "Anything that would concern law enforcement?" Vincent paused only long enough to choose his words carefully. "Only if handled improperly." Jordan's expression hardened. To him, the statement sounded like confirmation that the contents deserved closer examination. To Vincent, it simply reflected years of protecting sensitive professional materials according to established procedures. Aaron recognized that both men had heard the same sentence, but reached completely different conclusions. The misunderstanding seemed to widen with every exchange. Jordan asked Vincent whether he would voluntarily unlock the rear passenger door so the exterior of the briefcase could be viewed more clearly. Vincent made clear that he was not consenting to a search of the vehicle or the briefcase, but he voluntarily unlocked the rear passenger door and stepped aside so Jordan could view the case without opening or handling it. "The combination stays locked until I receive authorization from the office responsible for these materials," Vincent explained. "That protects both the documents and everyone involved." Jordan leaned slightly closer. Inside a narrow, transparent identification sleeve attached to the exterior of the case, Jordan noticed the corner of a dark blue authorization card bearing an official gold emblem unlike anything he had encountered during an ordinary traffic stop. His confidence immediately returned. Certain he had uncovered the key to the entire situation, Jordan stepped away from the vehicle, reached for his phone instead of the radio, and decided there was only one person who needed to hear about what he believed he had just found: Captain Arthur Daniels. Captain Arthur Daniels was reviewing overnight reports inside the precinct when his direct line rang. Seeing Jordan Johnson's name on the display, he answered expecting a routine request for guidance. Instead, Jordan spoke with unusual confidence. "Captain, I have a traffic stop that is raising several concerns. The driver is acting cooperative, but he has a locked briefcase containing what appears to be official government material. He refuses to open it without authorization, and I believe we should verify exactly who we are dealing with before allowing him to leave. Arthur listened quietly before asking the question every supervisor asks first. What is the driver's name? Jordan glanced toward Vincent, who continued standing calmly beside his vehicle with Aaron observing from several feet away. Vincent Holmes, Jordan replied. Silence filled the phone for nearly 3 full seconds. Arthur looked down at his notebook, assuming he had misheard. Repeat that name. Jordan did so, carefully spelling both the first and last name. Arthur's expression slowly changed. He opened the department's secure personnel directory and entered the name while continuing the conversation. Within moments, several government contact references appeared, each marked with restricted administrative notices that ordinary patrol officers rarely encountered. Arthur frowned, uncertain whether he was looking at the correct individual or someone with the same name. Do not speculate, he told Jordan. Do not make any additional assumptions. Keep the situation professional while I verify the information. Jordan interpreted the instruction as confirmation that his instincts had uncovered something significant. He ended the call feeling increasingly certain that he had prevented a potentially serious security issue. Aaron, however, noticed the conversation had produced the opposite reaction from what Jordan expected. Rather than sounding excited, Arthur had sounded cautious. That difference stayed with Aaron as he watched Jordan return toward Vincent. My captain is reviewing your information, Jordan explained. Vincent nodded politely. I appreciate that. There was no sarcasm in his voice, no frustration, only quiet patience. Several more vehicles passed by, and another commuter briefly slowed before continuing down the highway. The encounter remained peaceful, yet its length continued attracting attention. Aaron quietly approached Jordan once there was a natural pause. Speaking softly enough that Vincent could not hear, he asked, Do we have any evidence that a crime has occurred? Jordan answered without looking at him. Not yet. Aaron hesitated before adding. Then perhaps we should keep the stop limited to what we can clearly explain. Jordan simply replied. Experience tells me something is off. Aaron stepped back without arguing, though. The answer did little to ease his concern. Meanwhile, Arthur continued searching every official resource available to him. The information remained incomplete, but one detail immediately stood out. Several listed contacts belonged to offices inside the Department of the Air Force rather than ordinary civilian agencies. Before Arthur could make another inquiry, the secure government phone on his desk began ringing. Very few people possessed that number, and calls arriving through that line almost always involved official coordination between agencies. Arthur answered immediately. Captain Arthur Daniels speaking. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and unmistakably authoritative. Captain Daniels, this is the Air Force Operations Liaison Office at the Pentagon, coordinating directly with Peterson Space Force Base. We understand one of your officers is currently conducting a roadside stop involving General Vincent Holmes. We need to discuss the situation immediately. Arthur slowly rose from his chair, every assumption disappearing at once. While several miles away, Jordan remained completely unaware that the next phone call would change not only the traffic stop, but the course of his entire career. Captain Arthur Daniels remained standing as the secure caller continued speaking with calm precision. General Vincent Holmes is traveling to a restricted strategic planning conference at Peterson Space Force Base this morning. His itinerary has already been verified through the appropriate federal channels. We understand one of your officers has extended a routine traffic stop. We need to know exactly what is happening. Arthur felt the weight of every word. There was no anger in the caller's voice, only quiet urgency backed by absolute authority. Yes, sir, Arthur answered. I am gathering the facts now. The response came immediately. Gather them quickly. The general schedule affects personnel from multiple commands. Delays have consequences far beyond a missed meeting. Arthur thanked the caller, ended the conversation, and immediately reached for his phone again. His first call went directly to Jordan. The moment Jordan answered, Arthur spoke. More firmly than he ever had before. Listen carefully. Do not ask General Holmes any additional investigative questions. Do not request access to any work materials. Keep the interaction professional while I drive to your location. Jordan blinked in surprise. The title Arthur had used barely registered in his mind. General. He assumed Arthur was simply being cautious until everything had been confirmed. "Captain, I still believe there are unresolved issues," Jordan replied. Arthur interrupted him. "Your belief is no longer the issue. Follow my instructions exactly. I will explain when I arrive." The line disconnected before Jordan could respond. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, still convinced there had to be information he was missing. Aaron watched Jordan's expression carefully. "Everything all right?" he asked. Jordan nodded once. "The captain is coming here personally." Aaron sensed that the answer revealed less than it concealed. He glanced toward Vincent, who remained composed despite having already spent far longer on the roadside than any ordinary driver would reasonably expect. Vincent checked the time on his wristwatch, then quietly returned his attention to the officers. There was no visible frustration, only the subtle disappointment of someone watching valuable minutes disappear. Aaron finally walked a few steps closer to Vincent. "Sir, would you like some water while we wait?" Vincent smiled appreciatively. "Thank you, officer. I am fine." That brief exchange struck Aaron more deeply than he expected. Even after an unnecessarily prolonged stop, Vincent answered with courtesy instead of resentment. Meanwhile, Arthur accelerated toward the highway, mentally reviewing every conversation he had just experienced. He knew the immediate priority was resolving the situation professionally, but another thought refused to leave him. If the Pentagon had contacted him this quickly, then someone inside the federal chain of command had already become aware of the delay. That meant the traffic stop was no longer simply a local matter. Back on the shoulder, Jordan continued observing the sport utility vehicle. For the first time since initiating the stop, uncertainty began replacing confidence. Nothing Vincent had done matched the picture Jordan had created in his own mind. Every document had been valid. Every answer had been calm. Every instruction had been followed. Yet Jordan struggled to admit that his original assumptions might have guided the entire encounter in the wrong direction. Before he could sort through those thoughts, Aaron quietly opened the secure law enforcement information portal on the computer inside his patrol vehicle. Using the driver's full name and the government contact references already returned to Captain Daniels, Aaron checked an authorized public affairs directory. A publicly released official photograph appeared on the screen. It showed Vincent Holmes wearing the United States Air Force service dress uniform, standing beside the Secretary of the Air Force during a nationally recognized leadership ceremony. Aaron stared at the image in complete silence, then slowly lifted his eyes toward the man waiting patiently only a few yards away, just as Captain Arthur Daniels turned into the highway shoulder with his emergency lights flashing. Captain Arthur Daniels brought his vehicle to a controlled stop behind the patrol cars and stepped out almost immediately. His pace was steady but purposeful, revealing none of the alarm he felt after the call from the Pentagon. Jordan walked toward him expecting a quiet strategy discussion before the stop continued. Instead, Arthur raised one hand just enough to signal that the conversation could wait. Without asking another question or looking inside the sport utility vehicle, he walked directly toward Vincent Holmes. Aaron watched in complete silence, already knowing from the photograph on his computer exactly who stood waiting beside the highway. Vincent met Arthur with the same composed expression he had maintained since the first emergency lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Arthur came to a stop a few feet away, adopted a respectful professional posture, and addressed the senior officer formally. "General Holmes," he said calmly, "I sincerely apologize for the delay and for the inconvenience you have experienced this morning." Jordan felt the air leave his lungs. Hearing the title spoken face to face erased every remaining doubt. Vincent acknowledged the greeting with quiet professionalism rather than satisfaction. "Captain Daniels," he replied, "thank you for coming." There was no anger in his voice, no trace of sarcasm, and no attempt to embarrass anyone standing nearby. Arthur continued, choosing every word carefully. "I have already been informed that your travel schedule is important. I will make certain this matter is resolved as quickly and professionally as possible." Vincent gave a slight nod. "I appreciate that. My concern has never been arriving late. My concern is making sure situations like this remain focused on facts rather than assumptions." Those words settled heavily over the roadside. Aaron lowered his eyes for a moment, recognizing the quiet lesson hidden inside the sentence. Jordan remained motionless. For the first time since initiating the stop, He replayed every question he had asked and every conclusion he had reached before gathering objective evidence. The certainty that had felt so convincing earlier now seemed painfully fragile. Arthur turned toward Jordan with the calm expression expected from an experienced supervisor. "Officer Johnson, General Holmes's identification and vehicle documentation are valid. There is no basis to continue extending this encounter." Jordan nodded slowly. "Yes, Captain." His voice sounded noticeably different now, stripped of the confidence that had guided him only minutes earlier. Arthur then faced Vincent once more. "General, unless there is anything you would like to address before departing, you are free to continue to your meeting." Vincent looked briefly toward Jordan before answering. "There is one thing." Everyone on the shoulder instinctively became still. Even the passing traffic seemed to fade into the background for a moment. Vincent stepped forward only enough to ensure he was speaking to Jordan directly, without raising his voice. "Officer Johnson, today you did not know who I was, and that is perfectly acceptable. You were never expected to know my position before speaking with me. What matters is something far more important." Jordan listened without interrupting. Vincent continued. "Long before anyone discovers a person's title, profession, or accomplishments, they deserve to be treated with the same fairness and respect you would offer every member of the public. Titles should never determine courtesy. Character should." No one responded immediately. The simplicity of the statement carried more weight than any lecture could have delivered. Vincent then thanked Arthur for coming personally, entered his vehicle, and prepared to leave. As the sport utility vehicle merged smoothly back into traffic, Aaron believed the incident had finally come to an end. Yet only a few seconds later, Arthur's department-issued phone vibrated once again. He glanced at the secure caller identification, and his expression changed. The display showed another secure call from the Department of the Air Force Liaison Office, now joined by a representative responsible for interagency coordination. Arthur answered the secure call only after Vincent's vehicle disappeared into the flow of traffic. He listened carefully for nearly a minute without speaking more than a few brief acknowledgments. When the conversation ended, he lowered the phone slowly and looked toward Jordan with an expression that revealed neither anger nor relief. "Return to the station," he said calmly. "Both of you. We will finish our reports there." Jordan nodded without asking questions. During the drive back, the silence inside his patrol vehicle felt louder than the siren he had activated earlier that morning. Every decision replayed itself with uncomfortable clarity. He remembered deciding the vehicle looked out of place before observing any violation. He remembered assuming Vincent's calm demeanor meant he was hiding something. Most of all, he remembered how easily one assumption had invited another until they felt like established facts. Aaron followed several car lengths behind, carrying a similar weight for different reasons. He kept asking himself whether he should have spoken up sooner. Although he had quietly questioned the direction of the stop, he had ultimately remained an observer rather than actively challenging the expanding investigation. By the time both officers arrived at the precinct, Captain Daniels was already waiting in the conference room. He instructed them to complete independent reports before discussing the incident together. "Write only what you personally observed," Arthur said. "Do not write what you believed. Separate facts from conclusions." Jordan stared at the blank report on his computer longer than he had expected. Each sentence forced him to distinguish between what had actually happened and what he had merely assumed. As he worked through the timeline, he noticed something unsettling. Nearly every major decision after the initial stop had been influenced not by evidence, but by interpretations he had never verified. Across the room, Aaron quietly finished his own report. He documented every question, every response, and every instruction exactly as he had witnessed them. He deliberately avoided assigning motives to anyone. His responsibility was accuracy, not judgment. Several hours later, Arthur collected both reports and compared them line by line. Their descriptions of the facts matched closely, yet one difference immediately stood out. Aaron's report described a professional driver who cooperated throughout the encounter. Jordan's report unintentionally revealed how often suspicion had guided the direction of his questioning despite the absence of objective indicators. Arthur closed both folders without saying a word. Midway through the afternoon, an internal message arrived from the department's Professional Standards Division requesting copies of every report, body camera recording, dispatch log, and radio transmission connected to the traffic stop. The request carried an expedited review designation rarely used outside matters receiving significant administrative attention. The review also requested Jordan's recent traffic stop data after preliminary records showed that he had extended searches and employment questioning more frequently during stops involving black drivers than during comparable stops involving white motorists. Jordan quietly looked toward Arthur. "Is this because of the Pentagon?" Arthur answered honestly. "The request does not say. We are not going to speculate." That evening, after returning home, Jordan found himself unable to stop thinking about Vincent's final words. Titles should never determine courtesy. Character should. The sentence repeated in his mind with growing clarity. For years, he had believed professionalism meant treating everyone according to department policy. Only now did he recognize that professionalism also required questioning his own assumptions before they influenced his decisions. The following morning, the department held its regular command briefing. Near the end of the meeting, Arthur entered carrying a sealed envelope bearing an official federal insignia. The room became noticeably quieter as he placed it on the conference table. Looking directly at Jordan, he said, "This arrived for our department less than an hour ago. It is addressed to you by name." Jordan felt every eye in the room shift toward him as Arthur slowly slid the unopened envelope across the table, leaving everyone wondering whether it contained a formal complaint, an unexpected consequence, or something no one in the department had anticipated. The conference room remained silent as Jordan carefully opened the sealed envelope under Captain Daniels' supervision. Every officer present expected formal disciplinary language, a notice of investigation, or perhaps correspondence from a federal agency requesting additional statements. Instead, Jordan unfolded a single professionally printed letter bearing the official seal of the Department of the Air Force. He read the first paragraph once, then a second time, uncertain whether he had misunderstood it. Arthur quietly asked, "Would you like to read it aloud?" Jordan nodded. The letter stated that General Vincent Holmes appreciated the department's cooperation after the roadside encounter and recognized Captain Daniels' prompt effort to end an unnecessarily extended stop and preserve the integrity of the subsequent review. It continued by explaining that the general would soon deliver a leadership seminar at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, focusing on decision-making under pressure, professional communication, and the influence of unconscious assumptions during public interactions. General Holmes did not ask the department to predetermine Jordan's punishment, but he did request that the traffic stop remain part of the formal professional standards review. Separately, he invited Officer Johnson to attend the seminar as a participant. The room fell completely silent. Several officers exchanged surprised glances. Jordan lowered the letter slowly. Of every outcome he had imagined since the traffic stop, this possibility had never entered his mind. Midway through the morning, Arthur broke the silence. "That invitation is not a reward," he said evenly. "It is also not a punishment. It is an opportunity. What you choose to do with it is entirely your decision." Jordan looked back at the letter. The final sentence stood apart from the rest of the page. It read, "Sometimes the most valuable lesson begins with the moment we realize we were asking the wrong questions." Those words stayed with Jordan long after the briefing ended. Several days later, he arrived at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center wearing a standard department uniform rather than formal dress attire. He quietly took a seat near the back of the auditorium, hoping to avoid unnecessary attention. Officers from local departments, state agencies, federal organizations, military police units, and training academies gradually filled the room. The atmosphere was professional, respectful, and focused on learning rather than ceremony. Jordan noticed that no one appeared interested in identifying him or discussing the roadside incident. They had come to hear an experienced military leader speak about judgment, responsibility, and public trust. When General Vincent Holmes entered the stage, the audience welcomed him with polite applause. He thanked everyone for their service before beginning a thoughtful presentation built around real leadership challenges rather than personal achievements. He spoke about slowing down before reaching conclusions, recognizing how easily assumptions can replace evidence, and remembering that authority carries the responsibility to remain fair even during uncertainty. At no point did he mention Jordan's name or describe the traffic stop. Jordan gradually realized that Vincent had intentionally protected his dignity despite having every opportunity to do the opposite. Near the conclusion of the seminar, Vincent paused and looked across the audience. "I would like to ask one participant a question," he said calmly. Hundreds of eyes followed his gaze until it settled directly on Jordan. The room remained completely still. Vincent smiled warmly and said, "Officer Johnson, if you are willing, would you please join me here for just a moment?" Jordan slowly stood, feeling every heartbeat as he walked toward the stage. He had no idea what question awaited him, and neither did anyone else in the auditorium. The walk from the audience to the stage felt much longer than it really was. Jordan stopped beside General Vincent Holmes, uncertain whether he was about to face public criticism or a difficult question. Vincent extended his hand first. After a brief pause, Jordan accepted it. The handshake was firm, respectful, and entirely free of resentment. Vincent turned toward the audience before speaking. "Many people believe leadership is measured by how often someone is right. I have learned that leadership is more often revealed by what someone chooses to do after discovering they were wrong." He then looked back at Jordan. "Officer Johnson, if you could return to that morning with everything you know today, what would you do differently?" The auditorium became perfectly still. Jordan did not answer immediately. He took a slow breath before speaking honestly. "I would introduce myself first. I would clearly explain the reason for the stop. I would focus on observable facts instead of trying to confirm my own assumptions. Most importantly, I would remember that every person deserves the same level of professionalism before I know anything about their career, their background, or their accomplishments." Vincent smiled gently. "That answer tells me you have already started learning the lesson that matters most." A quiet round of applause spread across the room, not because anyone had won an argument, but because everyone recognized the value of genuine self-reflection. After the seminar ended, Vincent and Jordan remained near the stage speaking privately for several minutes. Vincent explained that throughout his military career he had encountered people who underestimated him before learning his rank, but he had also met countless officers, soldiers, police officers, and public servants who treated every individual with fairness regardless of appearance. "Those are the people I remember most," Vincent said. "Not because they were perfect, but because they never allowed assumptions to become stronger than evidence." Jordan thanked him sincerely. "I cannot change that morning," he admitted, "but I can decide how I serve tomorrow." Vincent nodded. "That decision belongs to you every single day." The Professional Standards Review concluded that Jordan had lacked an adequate factual basis for extending the stop beyond the original equipment inquiry. It also found that racial assumptions had influenced his interpretation of Vincent's vehicle, composure, employment, and possession of an official briefcase. Jordan received a formal corrective action, mandatory bias training, and a period of supervisory review. Vincent supported the educational program, but he did not request that the department erase the official findings. Several months later, Captain Arthur Daniels announced a new department training initiative focused on communication, procedural fairness, and professional decision-making during public encounters. Jordan volunteered to help develop the program. Rather than hiding the traffic stop from new recruits, he used it as an example of how easily confidence can become bias when officers stop questioning their own conclusions. Aaron also joined the program, sharing how important it was for partners to speak respectfully when they sensed an investigation drifting away from objective facts. The training soon became part of the department's annual professional development curriculum. During its first session, an unexpected guest entered the classroom. General Vincent Holmes accepted the invitation to address the newest class of officers. As the presentation concluded, Jordan and Vincent stood together at the front of the room. No cameras, no headlines, and no dramatic speeches marked the moment. Only two professionals who understood that trust is rebuilt through consistent actions rather than a single apology. The newest officers watched them shake hands once again, seeing not the beginning of a friendship built on extraordinary circumstances, but a reminder that accountability and respect can exist together without diminishing either one. Perhaps that quiet moment became the most meaningful lesson anyone carried home that day. Sometimes the moments that shape a person do not arrive with celebration or recognition. They begin with an uncomfortable realization that challenges long-held beliefs about ourselves and the people around us. This story quietly reminds us that first impressions can feel convincing while still being incomplete, and that humility often begins when we become willing to question our own certainty. There are times when a single conversation, handled with patience instead of pride, creates opportunities for growth that punishment alone never could. Perhaps the strongest measure of character is not whether mistakes are avoided forever, but whether someone chooses to learn from them with honesty and carries those lessons into every future encounter. If this story stayed with you, we would love to hear your thoughts. How would you have responded if you had been standing in Jordan's position? And what lesson from Vincent's approach do you think would have remained with you long after that day ended?